COVID-19 response, what the Biden administration is saying about the vaccine supply at home and abroad, pro-life legislation, how a new bill would offer more support to pregnant women, immigration reform, what would change under the Democrats' recently unveiled proposal, and papal trip preview. Cardinal Fernando Filoni tells us about his experience living in Iraq ahead of a visit by Pope Francis next month. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, February 19th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden visits Michigan to get an up-close look at a Pfizer vaccine manufacturing plant. And he announced a $4 billion plan to help vaccinate people across the globe while brutal winter weather slows the vaccine rollout here in the United States. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports.
Well, good evening. A very busy day for President Joe Biden. He took part in the G7 meeting, addressed the Munich Security Conference, all this as the U.S. rejoins the Paris Climate Agreement and the virus battle rages. After his previously scheduled trip to the Midwest was delayed one day by nasty winter weather, President Joe Biden tours a Pfizer vaccine manufacturing plant in Kalamazoo, Michigan. The president meeting with the workers whose job is making one of the two federally approved COVID-19 vaccines. Earlier, the White House COVID-19 response team blaming the recent brutal weather for slowing down the vaccine rollout.
As of now, we have a backlog of about 6 million doses due to the weather.
That's about 3 days of delayed shipping. Workers snowed in, road closures, power outages. But as the weather gets better,
we're already working to clear this backlog. 1.4 million doses are already in transit today.
Meanwhile, President Joe Biden on the virtual global stage at the G7 announced the U.S. will kick in $4 billion to help vaccinate people in poor nations. He also addressed the Munich Security Conference.
And I'm sending a clear message to the world. America is back.
President Biden says our galvanizing mission is to demonstrate the value of democracy.
Democracy doesn't happen by accident. We have to defend it, fight for it, strengthen it, renew it.
The president also says competition with China is going to be stiff, and Russia is trying to weaken the NATO alliance.
It is not about pitting East against West. It's not about we want a conflict. We want a future where all nations are able to freely determine their own path without a threat of violence or coercion.
In his speech, which was a repudiation of President Donald Trump's America First policy, President Joe Biden said he wants to negotiate again with Iran over its nuclear program. President Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of the 2015 nuclear deal. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Nebraska Congressman Jeff Fortenberry is crafting a bill he says could prevent abortions and provide needed services to women. It is called the Care for Her Legislation Act, and he's now gaining the support needed to get it passed. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, Jeff Fortenberry, congressman, tells me that this legislation is needed. It'll help bridge the gaps between public and private partnership. He says too often when unexpected pregnancies occur, our system chooses couples or tells couples to choose, and many times they choose abortion. But this legislation will help prevent that.
This is a significant problem because abortion causes such a wound in the soul of the person and a wound in our country.
Catholic Congressman Jeff Fortenberry says while the country may be divided on abortion, it is interesting to note that a significant majority of Americans agree that the government should not pay for it. The Nebraska Republican says the Care for Her legislation will prevent abortions.
The idea of Care for Her is to wrap a person around health care, economic support, as well as social support, so they know at that moment there is a commitment to care, a community of care there for her at this journey of life, at the beginning of the journey of life.
The specifics of the bill are still being developed, but it will include important help with proper health care and nutritional guidance, along with social support in the form of mentoring.
and even job training for a better life.
I received a piece of email after I sent this idea out to my constituents. And a woman said to me, she said, you know, I had an abortion at a young age. If there had been a system like this around me, maybe I would have made a different choice. Maybe that would have been better. And that's exactly what we want to do here.
Mallory Quigley with the Susan B. Anthony list tells me she hopes this is only the beginning, with more than 30 pro-life women recently elected to the House.
Many of them are already starting to take stands to be not just pro-life votes, but bold pro-life voices, using the platform to speak out on the House floor, to talk to their colleagues on both sides of the aisle about where there is consensus.
Congressman Fortenberry says that he will continue to fight for the rights of the unborn and the Hyde Amendment, which prevents your tax dollars from being used to fund abortions. Now, he says that he's working on this legislation and will continue to follow it. From the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
We turn now for a closer look at the Biden administration's proposed immigration plan unveiled just yesterday. The broad immigration bill, known as the U.S. Citizenship Act, would, among other things, provide an 8-year pathway to citizenship for 11 million people living in the U.S. without legal status. Joining me now on Skype with his analysis is Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. Alfonso, welcome back. So great to see you again. One of the bill's lead sponsors, Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, is speaking about the legislation. He called it, quote, a bill that we can all be proud of. What are your thoughts on what's being proposed?
Well, look, unfortunately, for somebody who believes in immigration reform, this bill is dead on arrival. I think this bill was introduced to please liberal immigration advocates, but they were not thinking of building consensus. And the only way we can get immigration reform, and this has been so for the past 20 years, is to build bipartisan consensus. And for that, you need to reach out across the aisle. But this bill was introduced without any input from Republican members, without checking with conservative and Republican leaders who believe in immigration reform, like me. So it's really dead on arrival. And another reason why it's so hard to build that bipartisan consensus to get something like this done is that the administration, through executive order, is dismantling border security and immigration enforcement measures that are necessary and are beginning to create another humanitarian crisis at the border and south of the border. So in that environment, it's just really very difficult to create the bipartisan consensus that you need.
Alfonso, what do you make of the timing of this bill? Some Republicans are questioning it, given the needs that still need to be addressed amid the pandemic.
It seems to me that it would be smarter for them to look at something smaller, like a DREAM Act or a bill to help those from Central America who benefited from temporary protected status. Let's work on a smaller bill and try to rebuild the trust between Democrats and Republicans to get something done. And that would make more sense because in terms of the DREAM Act and TPS, those are people who are already in the United States. But the timing is off.
Alfonso, is there anything in the bill, that you do like, and what would you like to see moving forward?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, this is not a comprehensive bill. They'll say it's comprehensive immigration reform, but it's really not. It's just a legalization bill. And while immigration reform must include legalization, it has to include strong border security. The measures that this bill contains on border security are very weak. It's all about technology, but it really doesn't address seriously the need to increase the border patrol. And also, it just doesn't consider extending new border fencing along the southern border. And nobody's talking about building a 2,000-mile wall, but we need border fencing in certain areas where illegal entry happens. And in the past, Democrats have supported it. Now they're not supporting it. And the other thing that it's missing, it's a workable guest worker program. Every time we talked about immigration reform in the past, we talked about the need to have a mechanism to allow the foreign workers that we need to come in legally to the country, not stay here permanently, go back to their home country when their work is done, and then re-enter when they're needed again. Allow for that circularity. If we don't have that mechanism, a few years from now, after we pass this bill, then we would have a new community of undocumented immigrants, and we would be back in the same place. So we need a guest worker program.
Well, Alfonso, we will leave it right there. We thank you so much for your insight today. We really appreciate it. Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. Thank you again. The Vatican expects to see a record deficit of $60 million when it balances its books this year. The Secretariat for the Economy said COVID-19 heavily impacted the Holy See's total revenue of over $300 million. The Secretariat said 68% of the Holy See's total expenses will be devoted to apostolic activities, 17% to management and other assets, and 15% to administration and service activities. A Catholic archbishop in Austria fears the country's recent ruling on assisted suicide is, quote, just the beginning. Archbishop Frank Lackner from Salzburg says the faithful cannot remain silent. Austria's highest court recently struck down a ban on euthanasia and ordered the government to lift the ban this year. Pope Francis says to not let the pandemic keep us from having hope.
Qué importante es soñar juntos y mirar hacia adelante.
At a message to the United States Religious Education Congress, the Holy Father says dreams are built together, and it is important to look towards the future as a community. He says sacrifice is necessary to build fraternity and to let the Holy Spirit work in our lives. People in Sicily are dealing with volcanic ash falling down across their towns. Mount Etna continues to erupt, shooting lava and ash up into the air. It is considered the most active volcano in Europe. And you can see the spectacular smoke and burning boulders. The ash is covering villages miles away from the peak, and lava is pouring into deserted valleys. Coming up, Vatican vaccine. The Holy See reconsiders its policy for employees. And coronavirus pandemic. Dr. Mark Strand joins us with an update on the virus. Well, the Vatican says it will not punish employees for refusing the COVID-19 vaccine. The Vatican explained the decree requiring employees to receive a vaccine was issued to provide an urgent response to protect the employees and the working environment, taking into account the danger of any refusal that it could have on the community. However, the employees do have the freedom to choose whether or not to take the vaccine. The United States isn't the only one announcing more funding for global vaccines.
La proposition de doubler la contribution.
The European Union's Executive Commission says it plans to double its contribution to the World Health Organization's COVAX program. They are pledging over $1 billion to deliver vaccines to poor nations. Another $121 million will support vaccination campaigns in Africa. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., some of the states with the smallest populations are having the greatest success when it comes to COVID-19 vaccine distribution. According to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, New Mexico, North Dakota, and West Virginia top the list, ranked by the percentage of COVID-19 vaccines they have administered of those that have been distributed to them. Dr. Mark Strand, professor at the North Dakota State University School of Pharmacy and Department of Public Health, joins me now on Skype. Dr. Strand, so good to see you again. We just mentioned the top states with the highest distribution rates, yours being one of them. Why do you think North Dakota has been so successful in its vaccine rollout, and what's made the difference there?
First off, last summer, we were one of 4 states that were selected by the CDC to do a early preparedness planning scheme. And so we were ready to deliver and administer the vaccines as soon as they were made available. We've also had tremendous cooperation among pharmacy, local hospital systems, clinics, and of course, the public health department. So that's another reason for our success.
And what do you think other states can learn from your state?
Certainly central coordination with cooperation. You can't have health systems, trying to monopolize access to doses. And so just that sense of equity across the state under coordinated leadership is really key.
I know, Dr. Strand, earlier this week, the COVID-19 variant first detected in the UK was identified there in North Dakota. What do we know about those cases?
This week we've had our first cases of this new variant. And, I do want people to know that this is not a surprise. These viruses, they mutate frequently and usually they become dead ends. But then sometimes they do persist in the population, and that's what we're experiencing. And I hope that people realize, first off, there's good evidence that the vaccines we currently have are effective against those variants. But it's also a reminder of why we need both a high vaccine coverage, and then also we need to continue to use our common public health preventive measures that we've been doing in order to really snuff out the cases that are out there. It's also a reminder that there's always a risk that these variants could represent a kind of seasonal coronavirus that we could have to cope with, indefinitely, for example, having annual vaccinations. So, it's of concern, but nobody should feel any need for panic over this.
Yeah, that's good to hear for sure. Well, across the U.S., there's still a lot of conversation about whether it's safe or not to return to the classroom. Can you give us your perspective on that as both a public health expert and also an educator?
Yeah. Public schools have not been the source of a lot of outbreaks. They know how to follow rules. And although it's, young people who have low levels of risk, as long as the teachers and the administration are clear in enforcing guidelines such as phasing in return to school, of course, mask wearing, and then using pod mechanisms of group learning, there are ways in which we can return to the classroom safely. And let's hope that this can happen, because it's really important for the young people's just mental health and just their social needs.
Absolutely. We need to get our young people back in school for sure. Well, Dr. Strand, thank you so much for coming on. We always appreciate your analysis.
Thank you.
Up next, before Pope Francis travels to Iraq, Cardinal Fernando Filoni tells us about his time living in the war-torn country. And out of this world, America celebrates a new achievement on Mars. Pope Francis is leaving in 2 weeks for Iraq, and EWTN News Rome correspondent Colin Flynn sat down with Cardinal Fernando Filoni, former papal nuncio to Iraq, and began by asking him why he decided to stay in Iraq during the war.
Humanly speaking, I have no family. So I have no children, I have no wife, I am at the service of the church, so I have not to give to others occasion to worry about myself. I was free. And the people where you stay is your family. So I share with them.
You could empathize with them more.
Absolutely, yes.
You felt the same fear.
Absolutely, yes. This is why you enter in a relationship with them, and they will appreciate you.
How bad did it get? Because it is so hard for us to imagine, who have never lived in a war zone or visited a war zone. When you were there during the US invasion, how severe and dangerous was it?
When I was there, I said to the priests and the bishops, we stay here, we don't go away. We ask to open all the churches. So those who would like to come and to stay with us because they fearing to be touched by bombs or they can come and they find a shelter in our places. And a lot of people, nighttime, used to come also in the churches, bringing their mattress and staying together. It was a moment also sharing with the Muslim and the Christians, also brotherhood.
So Christians and Muslims would come and take shelter together?
Yes, and they told me sometimes We use also to sing a Christian song because also the Muslim like
the music.
Song.
A lovely moment of solidarity.
Yes.
A lovely human connection. This upcoming papal trip to Iraq, why is it so important now, the trip?
Well, the Holy Father many times manifests the will to go. Unfortunately, or for one reason or for the other, until now was not possible. There is not a very peaceful moment, ideal moment to go there. It's a real moment. COVID is for all everywhere. Security everywhere. You could find the difficulty.
Speaking of security, when I've been telling people, just my friends, about the upcoming trip, the one thing they ask me first is it going to be safe for the Pope?
I was in the war 3 times, so you are not safe when you are in this. You have to enfront it.
I read someone say about you, many great things have been said about you, but one thing was that you're as tough as nails. Do you know that expression?
No, I don't think that is true. That is an impression. I am not so tough. I am a poor man.
Determined, tough, unmoving.
You are a priest. You are a pastor. You cannot abandon the people. It's not a question of tough. Who is tough? The people are still living there, working there, suffering there. One day I will go, they will remain. Who is much more tough?
Your Eminence, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. God bless. Thank you.
And finally tonight, a historic moment for space exploration. NASA has completed the riskiest step yet in a quest to find out if life ever existed on Mars. Yesterday, Perseverance became the 9th spacecraft since the 1970s to land on the red planet. Correspondent Mark Irons joins us now with more. Mark?
Tracy, NASA's Perseverance rover is now sending back images from Mars. After a 6-month journey to get there, the real scientific exploration begins.
We are 1 minute from entry interface.
Inside NASA's Control Center in Pasadena, California, they were on the edge of their seats as the Mars rover Perseverance attempted landing yesterday.
We're about 30 seconds from entry interface. Once there is enough atmosphere, it will start controlling its path to the landing target.
A daunting task. Perseverance needed to slow down from 12,000 miles per hour to 0 in just 7 minutes in order to land safely. And it did.
Yes. The navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed, and we are seeing significant deceleration in the velocity.
Yes.
Perseverance now has radar lock on the ground. We have timing of the landing engines.
This is the 5th and most sophisticated rover NASA has ever sent to Mars.
This is so exciting. The team is beside themselves. It's so surreal. Stay tuned. We might get some pictures.
The mission is to gather data and look for signs of ancient life in a crater that once contained a lake nearly 4 billion years ago. At the same time, the focus is on the future.
Preparing for eventual human missions to Mars. And so this is one step along the way of our journey to accomplish that goal.
And it didn't take long for Perseverance to get right to work. The rover sent images from the red planet, and before calling it a day, it even blasted its first tweet from the Martian surface. It read simply, "I am safe on Mars. Perseverance will get you anywhere." Over the next 2 years, Perseverance will collect rock samples containing possible signs of bygone microscopic life. The samples will be sealed in tubes, retrieved, and eventually returned back here to Earth. The goal is to have them here as early as 2031. In the studio, Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.